Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to In Between, where Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast, revisits the Behind the Storms conversations from Season 8. During this in-between time, the end of Season 8 and the beginning of Season 9, which will take place at the end of September. Today's episode originally aired on the 9th of March, where I got to chat to Paul Stephenson, not only about his debut full collection Hard Drive, published by Carcanet Press, but also what led him to poetry in the first place. This podcast is available on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, Amazon Music, and even now on YouTube. So I guess there's nothing left for me to say other than to remind you to make sure that you have a cup of tea close at hand, or perhaps it's an espresso martini, perhaps it's a chilled rosé left over from what was supposed to be a summer but turned into a rather uninteresting spring. And next to your drink, I hope you also have something to snack on. This is Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast celebrating our Behind the Storms chats from Season 8. My name is Damien B, Donnelly, and I hope you enjoy the show. Today, joining me for Behind the Storms is Paul Stephenson, whose debut pamphlet, Those People, was the winner of the Poetry Business Competition, judged by Billy Collins, published by Smith Doorstop in 2015. In 2016, he followed that up with The Days That Followed Paris, published by Happenstance, reflecting on the November 2015 Paris attacks. In 2017, he won the Paper Swan Press Poetry Pamphlet Prize for Selfie with Water Lilies, and last year, Carcanet Press published his debut collection, Hard Drive, an examination of death, grief, loss, of which Sean Hewitt wrote, "Stephenson looks death in the eyes and holds his nerve like few others." Born in Cambridge, England, he studied modern languages, linguistics and European studies, has lived in Paris, Amsterdam and Brussels, and even before his first pamphlet win, he had already taken second prize in the Troubadour International Poetry Prize and had been one of the Aalborg 8 poets. Later on, he went on to become one of the Poetry in Aalborg curators and is a university teacher in Maastricht in the Netherlands. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Damien, thank you so much for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. And you're joining us from Brussels, yes?
I am. I'm working from home today. Yeah, I'm in Brussels. Rainy, cold, pretty grim out there.
So exactly like Dublin. We're sharing the weather today. So Paul, the Behind the Storms chats, they're all about beginnings, what attracted you to poetry in the first place. I know you have an MA in creative writing from Manchester Writing School, and you also took part in the Gerwood Avron mentoring scheme in 2013. But why poetry in the first place? Was there a moment that you remember first being captured by it?
I've always been into language play, and I was interested in linguistics. I studied French and German and Spanish, but never really did English literature. And I suppose my real passion was painting and art history for a long time. And then I think it was in my early 30s, I was working in France in an office in a sort of civil service style environment. And everybody was popping out for cigarette breaks. And I thought, gosh, this adds up to about an hour a day. How come they're allowed to go out for these extended breaks and I'm not a smoker and I can't? So I would just put a notepad under my arm, take a pen and go to the cafe across the road and just started scribbling, really. I had no poetry education. I just started writing short stories or little vignettes, nothing very good. And then went to Borders or went to Galloway and Porter in Cambridge and bought a few kind of old Faber titles, tried to sort of orient myself, bought a couple of magazines. But basically poetry found me. I can't quite believe I could be living my life without poetry now. It seems impossible.
You might be the first person who's actually admitted that being a non-smoker is what started the poetry. Probably. That's incredible. Yeah. Was it easy then, even though you have a background in linguistics, was it easy to get into poetry, to find your way into poetry without having actually studied it? Did you feel a sort of a bit more of a freedom?
It was a bit of a revelation, really, to sort of discover contemporary poetry and realize it's actually something quite different to what I thought, very accessible. And I suppose it suited me, these kind of bite-sized pieces of text. It's almost like sculpture on the page, isn't it? Making a little machine. And I guess I moved to London in 2009, 2 or 3 years after sort of beginning to find my way in poetry. And that helped. I'd go to the Troubadour fortnightly reading series, go to some things at the Betsy Trotwood, try to go out and about and meet people, do a few writing classes maybe with the poetry school. I knew no one at the beginning, and it's just incredible how through poetry I just have this incredible group of friends now.
And in terms of then submitting to the poetry business competition in the first place that you actually won, how much courage did it take? Did somebody encourage you to put together the pamphlet? Was it already there?
Well, I suppose I must acknowledge, of course, Peter and Anne Sansom, who run the poetry business. I went to one of Peter's workshops, I think, when he ran one in Cambridge, and I ended up doing what was obviously a very important week. They had a week at Lumbank, the Arvin property, and did a writing week, and I think that was very important for me in terms of, them encouraging me to keep writing, to sort of slow down a little bit, but to keep writing, introducing me to poets they publish in the North, poets like Tony Hoagland. That was very important. Michael Lasky, of course, used to run Smith's Knoll. I used to send out to Smith's Knoll, and I think I did a couple of writing weekends with him. So there were some important people early on. And of course, Anne-Marie Fife, who ran the Troubadour, was very, very encouraging.
And had you always, you mentioned earlier that you were also writing short stories, because so much of your poems, they are these little vignettes. There are these amazing, minute observations of moments of people on the periphery, of not necessarily close to you, but just these moments that you've captured. Has that always been something? Have you always been very aware of what's going on the borders around you?
Yeah, I think probably because I write often on trains or in cafes, or certainly in an urban environment where I'm very stimulated by what I see in signage or what I overhear through announcements or through conversations at the next table. And dialogue, which there's quite a bit of dialogue in some of my poems.
When those people, on the first pamphlet, when it actually came out, when you held it in your hands, was that the first time you considered you were a poet? Was that when the name or the title sort of latched on? Or had you already felt like you could claim that space of being a poet, that sense of entitlement?
That's a good question. I did the Jerwood Arvin mentoring scheme and the Albra 8, both around the same time, 2013. And I was absolutely thrilled to be selected by Patience Agbabi to work with her as one of 3 poets. One of the others was Neil Campbell. And during that week, we were encouraged to take ourselves seriously and call ourselves poets. And one of the things they did was, trying to encourage us all to create our own website or start our own blog. And that act, you've done it yourself, of actually putting yourself out there and calling yourself a poet and putting yourself into the public space that was quite a leap forward, and not something that was necessarily easy. I think today we're more au fait with everyone has a website and a blog and Twitter feed and Instagram. But back then it was really quite something, I think, to call yourself a poet, especially when I didn't have a publication. I had lots of poems in magazines, but no pamphlet as yet. And as you say, those people came out in 2016. To be chosen by Billy Collins, and then to go to the launch reading up in Grasmere, for Peter to open the boot of the car and, open this box, all of these bright green pamphlets. It was really quite something, a very memorable moment.
As we jump forward, because I do want to talk about Hard Drive. So your most recent collection, your debut collection, which I said was published last year by Carcanet. It's not the first time that you've written about grief, about loss, but perhaps it's the first time where it becomes such a central character. With Selfie with Water Lilies, you confront the loss of your father, and certainly the days that followed Paris examines the loss perhaps shared on a more global scale. But as within those people, you've interlaced all of those with these observations, as I said, about the everyday, the others, the absurdities, the communities, the overweight uncles, the school kids, the passwords, the brilliant poem that we'll talk maybe about later about beetroots. And of course, all this with this overwhelming skill of crafting every single line so perfectly. It's like watching a sculptor form your poems. You still retain all of this in hard drive. You still have these examinations, these incredible observations of those on the outskirts, the administrators, the funeral directors, the doctors, the taxi drivers. All these moments that perhaps allow yourself and even us as a reader to be able to distance ourselves at times from the grief that you say yourself in the poem is about 2 times the size of Texas. So it's a collection about the death of your long-term partner, Todd, at the age of 38. You said yourself that this wasn't the collection that you expected to write, but it turned out to be the collection that you had to write. And maybe you could tell us a little about those hard drives.
Yeah, I think, as you say, a lot of the things maybe that I'd been trying out in Those People and the days that followed Paris and Selfie, maybe I was channeling, trying stuff out, experimenting, playing around and learning my craft, and then channeled that all into hard drive, where I had one particular subject I was always writing about. You know, with every prompt, he was there sitting on my shoulder, you know, and I was channeling grief.
What made you first write it?
I had 2 manuscripts on the go. I sent 2 manuscripts to Carcanet, actually. One was a manuscript of sort of the best of my work over, I think, 10, 12 years, called Auto Routes, actually. You know, 6 clusters of work on different themes. And then I had this other manuscript going on. And many, many of the poems I'd been workshopping during COVID with my Saturday morning group. We went online in March 2020, and I was sort of in 2 minds. What should my first book be? What happens to all this work if I don't bring it together and I put the Todd poems out? So I sent the manuscript hard drive to Carcanet, maybe thinking I was all subconsciously self-sabotaging, actually, by saying, look, this is the other manuscript. If I know when you take poets onto a list, you want to consider, you know, do they have other future work? Here we go. And when we spoke 6 months later, they said that they felt that this was the manuscript that was original and the one that we had to foreground. And some of my poet friends had said it has to be these poems. And I thought, yeah, I mean, if I only get one book ever out there, you know, these are the poems I want published before I get hit by a bus, you know.
Yeah.
These are the ones that really matter.
How was it in planning? So it's broken down into 6 sections. Your first 3 are in chronological order after Todd's passing. Then you jump back and you give us this insight into the relationship, and then it zooms out again. Were they already in place when you were approached, or
there were 5 sections originally? The 6th section, which, as you say, zooms back out and looks at me as a writer from afar, kind of thing, and contemplates the whole act of writing grief and makes poems from that. That I sort of added as a 6th section. At one point, I thought maybe, you know, because this is getting big, this is a big book, and I think one of the reviewers has said it's too big. You're right. There were 3 parts that look at the performances, and rituals, and people engaged in these, in all of this that you have to do when dealing with the death, and then it goes back in time to explore the relationship. And I thought maybe that would be a sequel book, that I would have a book that goes back in time afterwards, a prequel, kind of a prequel sequel kind of thing. But I think friends said, you know, we need to know more. We want to know more about the relationship itself, you know, and that will give the poems earlier on, when you reread them, more meaning as well. So it was important because it is pretty hard going, a lot of the content, even though I try to come at it slant, or, as you say, drawing on the absurdity of some of these situations and the very self-indulgent nature of grief. But I felt it was important to also celebrate the good times, you know, and look back.
And I heard you saying about it, you said that it was a dialogue with the dead, exploring the absurdity of life and death, a rather funny enough and self-indulgent journey, I suppose, as grief always is. You know, it's always about the me now in this situation, as opposed to the person that we've actually lost. But I think what struck me most was that you said it was also a continuation of a relationship. And that struck me because I found it was so tender, so beautiful. But what struck me most was that I felt, because you put this down, you laid your grief down in the book, but you interlaced it with memories of your relationship. It means that by putting that out there and giving it to us as readers, the relationship also continued on in us, because we then become the carriers of these memories that you shared with us. So it became almost a global continuation of a relationship.
That's a really interesting observation, yeah. it's true. It's out there now. So that relationship is out there and belongs to everybody in a way. I mean, yeah, I think also because Todd was a writer, he'd written short stories, he'd published quite a few academic articles, he was writing a novel. It felt also that, a collaboration. We're writing this together. I'm drawing on, I'm not just inventorizing, but I'm drawing on everything, all the richness of what we had, and collecting it together, for posterity. Yeah. I mean, I'm the author on the cover, but
I suppose in that same question, there also comes the question of, was there a moment of questioning? Did you want to share it? Was there ever a moment where you thought, maybe this is just mine, I don't want to let everybody in? Or
yeah, it's extremely personal, of course, and you have to, with the poems, distance them sufficiently so that you are retaining a little bit of privacy. Yeah. And obviously you embellish things, but everything is authentic and true in terms of the emotional part of the poems. I mean, I think the poem at the end, maybe Your Brain, that was a poem I was nervous about because I thought, am I taking too much of a risk? Is this too personal, what I'm doing here? Obviously, I had questions about, legitimacy of what you're doing. Are you using somebody who's deceased? Very much aware that, parents and friends would read this book. You don't want to upset anybody. But at the same time, as an artist, as a writer, you've got to take certain risks because, do we need another book on death and loss and grief? So if you're going to do it, you've got to try something new out.
But it is one of those things that we all, it's a universally shared experience. And because I think in part of the extraordinary amount of humour that you've been able to put into it, these observations, again, of the absurdities, I think that's a great word for it, of these people who are all around you, like, taxi drivers, movers, phoning up, trying to cancel things, trying to... Yeah. All the things that are so frustrating and those silly things that you have to do. In case there's people out there who haven't seen it yet, I think what we must talk about maybe is the discombobulation that I think you've created within it in terms of how the collection is laid out, because that's also what keeps us on our toes. You have poems that appear sometimes horizontal, sometimes vertical, sometimes blacked out, sometimes crossed out. There's this perhaps a sense at times of wanting the reader to feel a little bit jarred, a little bit thrown. So we're not really aware of what's coming next. Was this sort of an intentional?
Oh, definitely. Both visually, the form and shape of the poems on the page, one after the other. I wanted to make sure I kept mixing it up, but also the emotional kind of resonance of each poem. I didn't want the reader to be conditioned and to have 6 sections all of sad poems. I wanted to chop it up, keep things surprising, ensure that the reader has to keep negotiating their own emotional response to the poem. Is this and be taken by surprise because, oh my god, this one's funny or this one's sorrowful. That was really important. And when it came to the proof stage, of course, I spent a huge amount of time ensuring that the poems were neat, that they looked exactly as I wanted them. So in a couple of occasions, we've had to go down one font size or really reduce the margins back, to get every poem looking like it was if it was in a magazine, originally. Yeah.
Well, I think by doing that, every time you turn the page, there's something new, there's something slightly different, there's something slightly fresh. So it never, even, if the book, you hold it up and it's 128, is it 128? 128 pages perhaps, but it doesn't feel 128 pages because you're constantly, as I said, a little bit thrown. You're constantly like, oh, this is something new, this is something different. And even the fact that it's broken down into sections, you can take it in stages.
Exactly. It reads like a novel, I think, in poems, in parts, at least the first 3 parts. And then, we go back in time. So it is linear, it is sequential.
In Selfie with Water Lilies, the poem that jumped out to me the most, or the poem that I thought this is such craft, was The Apprentice, the poem about beetroots. I think you've actually read that perhaps on the podcast a few years ago. An extraordinary poem because at the end of every single line is the word beetroot, but at no point when you're reading the poem are you hit with a beetroot. It doesn't feel clunky, forced. It doesn't feel overworked. And then in Hard Drive, you have a poem that's almost a little bit similar in terms of its layout, relationship as a covered reservoir. And there, that wordplay there is the word water that reoccurs at the end of every single sentence. But again, you sculpt it and crafted it so perfectly that you don't even notice it. You see it on the page, but you have to keep looking at the page because you don't hear yourself repeating the word. How long does this take to produce and perfect?
I mean, it's hugely enjoyable. It's a lot of fun doing these kind of things, but you've got this one constraint, this anaphora, having this word at the end of the line. And with the Beetroot poem, I mean, that's very much a poem of its time when we were all watching Apprentice with Alan Sugar. And you just start with a line, 2 lines, and think, can I keep this going? Can I sustain this? And there's quite a lot of enjambment in that poem. So, the sentence, the word beetroot is sometimes in the middle of the sentence, it's sometimes at the end, sometimes with a question mark or exclamation, or even hyphenated and split, as in beetroot scented perfume. So that was a huge amount of fun to write. And it's a huge amount of fun to read. Audiences always respond very well to that. The poem in the book, Relationship as Covered Reservoir. Yeah, I lived in on the top of Mount View Road in Crouch End on the top of the hill. There was a massive covered reservoir at the end of the street, at the end of Mount View Road, and so I tried to use this reservoir as a metaphor for long-term relationship and the strains, the stresses, the unspoken pressures, perhaps, of being together over a long period of time. So again, I had fun with this poem, and I wanted to create a kind of heaviness, a kind of oppressive. I mean, when you look at those massive covered reservoirs, you just wonder, what on earth is it like underneath, in the dark there?
Would you like to read one of them for us right now?
I could read that one if you like. Relationship as Covered Reservoir. All the years close to water, by a bulk of water, that hulk of water, flat water. Still water, being water, water in the dark, oblivious water, obviously water. Water where water should be, water with a roof, with walls, a body of water, shared water, everyone's water, neighbouring water, neighbourly water, water with grass on, you couldn't walk on, water close by, closed off water. Water behind railings, water off limits, supposed water, ought to be water. Take your word for it, water. Water under lock and key, padlocked water. Water with keep out signs. Official water, officious water, measured water, metered water, believed in water, believed to be water, hypothetical water. Water waiting, patient water. Water biding its time, well-behaved water. Weekday water, rainy day water, rained on water, going nowhere water. Water, treading water. Water concealed, unrevealed, new, no surprise, water. No twilight, sunrise water, no boats or swans water, nothing floating water. No running on water. Water not sailed on, no kids laughing water. Water you could land a helicopter on, take off from, drown a city with water. Water we presumed to be water, took for granted water, ignored for years water. Didn't think twice about water, blind to water, could have broken into water. Jumped up and down on water, hard water, difficult water, by itself water. A watery self, water alone, lonely water, encased water, with a lid on water, couldn't breathe water, or evaporate water, let off steam water, dry water, shy water, reserved water, quiet water, some days not speaking water. Water working, water not working, getting worked up water. Water we ran and ran.
My goodness. Extraordinary. Such weight and tenderness combined in both. I think wordsmith is definitely a word that needs to be applied to your talent as a writer. That's incredible. Thank you for reading that, Paul. And speaking of wordsmith, speaking of words and titles, Hard Drive. How did the title come about? I know you have the poem Hard Drive, but you think about it in so many different ways, from all the, from the literally the hard drives where all our information, our pictures, our memories are stored, to what has been almost reoccurring in some of your, even in your pamphlets, those hard drives, those journeys, the journeys on the motorways, the journeys with fathers in cars where you don't know where you're going to the journey through grief. Was Hard Drive always the title?
It was possibly Angle Poise, which is the preface poem, but I felt that was a little bit too poised and poetic in the end. And Hard Drive was direct, it was immediate. Obviously, in the first instance, it refers to the hard drives that are in storage or that were in a kitchen cupboard for a long time, with all the files on, all our videos, all our life. But it's indeed the hard drives to the crematorium, to collect ashes, to go to the police station, whatever. It's the hard drives, to go to the mortuary, to visit the body. It's the need to keep going with something that's actually very long and arduous. The whole process of, as you know, getting the administration done, clearing things. Yeah, hard drive. A relationship is a hard drive. I mean, and it can be that in a positive way as well. Passionate and sexy. A hard drive. But I felt it opened itself up to many different explorations and interpretations.
And was the collection then itself, was there a sense of laying to rest with the collection itself?
Certainly. I mean, it's that just that feeling of catharsis, of bringing it all together, of collecting it all. I mean, of course, there were many poems that didn't go into the book in the end, and you do wonder about your orphan poems. What will happen to them? Do they deserve to see the light of day? But you have to make certain creative choices, and the book was getting long. But it feels like I've laid something to rest, or at least I've created, I hope, something beautiful.
Yeah.
And made something beautiful out of pain and misery and sorrow that will live on, and hopefully will give other writers permission to explore grief and loss through some of the ways I have, which was very much dealing with the day-to-day experience, actually celebrating the people I met along the way who as I talk about, it's a kind of soap opera of bereavement. I didn't realize I was writing about all these individuals until I saw all the poems together. And it makes sense. I mean, if you go back to those people, and this interest in characters, personalities, people, that sort of makes sense. And I think when I did the launch, actually, Helena Nelson said, "Do you think you're done now, with Todd?" And I don't know. I don't foresee writing any further poems, but who knows what will happen in the future.
Might be whispers. Speaking of the future, I know poetry in Aldeburgh suffered its own loss last year with the loss of Robin Boyd, but is there a hope for it? Is there a possibility of it returning again?
We hope so. We took a year out last year. We'd already decided before Robin passed away that we'd realised we didn't have money in the bank to run a festival. We don't receive any kind of external funding, and it's an expensive thing to put on a festival. But we were absolutely astounded in 2022 when we were back on the ground for the first time after COVID in the newly revamped Ballroom Arts venue. But yes, unfortunately last year we couldn't put one on anyway. Robin suddenly passed away. So we've taken a breather, but there is new blood. There are new poets who have moved up to Suffolk. We are now having team meetings, and we're hopefully going to be putting on a festival this November, 8th to 10th. It's always a kind of party weekend by the sea. So we've reserved our venue, and hopefully there will be poetry back on the ground in Aldeburgh by the sea, close to the beach.
And hopefully then later on this year we'll also hear more from you, perhaps reading around the country, reading England or Ireland, perhaps from Hard Drive. That would be lovely.
That would be amazing. I need to organise myself. I did a few readings in the summer and autumn in London and Belfast. But I really should set up some readings for this spring and summer.
Excellent. Any festivals out there listening in, just give Paul a little DM. Well, listen, Paul, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. I wish you so much luck in the future, and look forward to seeing you, hopefully in person someday soon.
Thanks so much for allowing me to talk on and around the book and the poems. It's been a real pleasure.
Here to share poems from that debut full collection, Hard Drive, which feel like hymns of love laid down next to stages of grief. I am very honoured to welcome back to Into the Storms, Paul Stephenson.
Anglepoise. You'll be in the front room at your computer, surrounded by your family of Anglepoise lamps. The novel will be making steady progress. I'll be in the kitchen, with my laptop and radio, editing some poem or other, devoting an hour to the question of a comma, semicolon, full stop. Voices will drift up to me from where you are. My drama will drift down the hallway to you. There'll be hot radiators and rugs, curtains drawn. We'll both be home, absorbed in our projects, each working our way through the bottle of red. I'll be alive, you'll be alive. It'll be like old times. Signature. In his sleep, except he isn't really sleeping, that's just what we like to tell ourselves. He looks as if he's grinning, as if he knows something new, has seen a sight to comfort him and offer reassurance, so he can close his eyes for good. Or else he's understood, once and for all, what us lot don't, that this here is one massive joke, some lame farce from the beginning. I wouldn't be surprised, because he had his own sense of humour, black, in the mishaps and embarrassment saw the human comedy, relishing the doddering and stumbling of others, their sticky situations, how they keep on talking, words making it worse, digging a hole for themselves. I look at his mouth and he's not saying much, but keeping stumm, lips sealed, mum's the word. And I'm positive, 100%, that he won't tell me what's tickling him. Not this time. I edge up, lean in and steep over. Allow myself to touch his forehead, lay my palm flat on the long fringe, and with my thumb caress each fine brow, stroke them in the right direction. Feel the love, cold and wet from refrigeration. Grief. It's not what it used to be, because it used to be gravel, flicked up by a spinning car tyre that punctured your heart. It used to be a hungry gruffalo that flattened you when you went for a walk. We're talking weeks, deep in a grotto with underground lakes, nothing but the drumming of stalactite drips drilling into your head. Back then it was the garbo of all garbos. I want to be alone, forever. A grueling Greek tragedy in 3,000 acts. It used to be day 4, and gripped by sorrow, the desire to drown yourself ungraciously at Hampton Court Lock. Officialdom. This case file is not concerning. It is not about. It does not regard. This case file is not relating to or pertaining to the matter in hand. This case file is touching the death of. And like a forefinger on the lips, I am touched by its usage, how it seeks to soften what is so hard. Grief as two sides of the Atlantic Ocean. This side me, that side them. This side 10 o'clock, that side 5. This side work, that side retirement. This side students, that side antiques. This side mobile, that side cell. This side pub, that side bar. This side centigrade, that side Fahrenheit. This side window, that side aircon. This side post-mortem, that side autopsy. This side aeroplane, that side airplane. This side mash, that side grits. This side stone, that side pounds. This side pan, that side skillet, this side shops, that side stores, this side license, that side license, this side pills, that side drugs, this side jug, that side pitcher, this side duvet, that side comforter, this side autumn, that side fall, this side harbours, that side harbours, this side getting on with it, that side too, this side telling everyone, that side no one. Clinically proven. I take your face creams. They're in the bathroom drawer, some empty, some on the go. Your Regenerist serum for neck and jawline from Olay. Your Regenerist 3-point super firming serum from Olay. Your Regenerist micro sculpting cream from Olay. Your Revitalift concentrated serum from L'Oréal Paris. Your Revitalift Miracle Blur oil-free instant skin smoother from L'Oréal Paris. Your Revitalift double lifting Day Jour moisturizer from L'Oréal Paris. Your Revitalift triple power day and night cream from L'Oréal Paris. Your Revitalift broad spectrum SPF 20 sunscreen from L'Oréal Paris. Your Men Expert Vitalift lifting moisturizer with intense double action pro-tensium and pro-retinol 2-in-1 firming gel plus anti-wrinkle cream from L'Oréal Paris. You should see my face. It's so smooth. The éclat, the glow. Enter the Jaya. They estimate that about 1.75 to 2.45 million tons of grief enter our system each year. Grief is twice the size of Texas and 3 times the size of France. As grief is discarded into the environment, its concentration continues to increase. Much of the grief is less dense than joy, meaning it will not sink beneath the appearance of happiness. The strongest, most buoyant grief shows resilience outdoors, allowing it to be transported over far distances. It persists at the surface as you make your way round, carried by currents and gathering, accumulating and forming the giant human patch of grief. One day, all the grief collected enters the Jaya. It is unable to leave the area, degrades slowly into small pieces under everyday effects of waves and sun. St. Pancras. I want my time with you for a coffee in St. Pancras. I wanted my time with you over coffees in St. Pancras. I wasted my time with you during coffee in St. Pancras. I fasted my time with you sipping coffee in St. Pancras. Fast was my time with you, quick coffees in St. Pancras. Fate was my time with you, the last coffee in St. Pancras. Writing to your mother. Whenever I sit down to write to your mother, there's the question of you. And whenever you come into my head, there's the decision to be made whether or not to mention your name. Whenever I go to mention your name, it's another reminder you've gone. And whenever your goneness seems violent and I recall your mother will be reading my words, I search for something more upbeat. Whenever I start searching for what's upbeat, I end up mining for a funny episode, an anecdote, falling back on your silliness, and see your mother's eyes passing over my words, her mouth turning up at the edges. Whenever your mother's mouth turns up at the edges, she's using the many muscles it takes to smile, and in the process, that small smile may fool her into thinking she is living a moment of happiness. Wedding in Limousin. I'm writing this in a swimming pool. In a swimming pool in which I am the only swimmer. I've stopped swimming to write this poem, here alone, just arrived, my first swim. 3 trains and a taxi, 38 degrees, a June heat wave. Standing here, cooling off, the robot, cleaning underwater, almost company. A pen is letting out its ink. A notebook covered in wet patches from my wet arm, right hand. Blotched words. Sun hot on my back, the blanks of paper wrinkling into waves. France. Sound of a tractor and a moment ago, church bells. A breeze, honeysuckle. All this way. I've come to represent you, but I'm also here for me. Hey, a swallow just skimmed the pool, was off again, 6th in a row. A swallow for each year you've been gone. It's time to swim.
Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and non-conformers, genders all and genders equal. We reach the end of this special in-between episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly and my guest today was Paul Stephenson, and you can find out more about Paul, his social media handles, where to buy Hard Drive over at today's blog post that accompanies every episode. Just head on over to eatthestorms.com, click on the podcast section called Listen to the Podcast, and there you will find a blog post for every episode. This was the In-Between with Paul Stephenson. Now, as I said to you earlier, season 9 will be coming back towards the end of September. So these are in-between episodes, filling the gap between season 8 and season 9. And they are coming randomly because while I'm also putting together these episodes and planning and interviewing guests for next season, I am also, along with Fiona Rourke, who was my sub-editor this time, working on the submissions that you recently sent in for issue 4 of The Storms, our journal of poetry, prose and visual arts. Now, the journal is supported by Fingal Arts and also Dublin, UNESCO City of Literature, and the theme for this new upcoming issue, which will be launched in our Gillen Castle on the 10th of November, is Dublin Days, from city to shore and across the sea. Submissions have now closed and we are wading through the absolutely sensational submissions that you've sent in. It is going to be a really, really difficult job cutting this issue down to size. But hey, I guess that's what the job of editors are for. So until next time, when we share another look back at our Behind the Storms chat, stay creative, stay curious, and most of all, stay bloody poetic.